An elderly woman leaves her simple life to live with her millionaire son. In the mansion, she's treated with contempt by his fiancée. After being assaulted and locked away during the wedding party, a detail on the floor reveals the truth, and her son finally sees what he ignored for far too long. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's get started. The house was quiet that Thursday afternoon, as it had been for the last few years. Helen adjusted the embroidered pillows on the worn-out sofa, the very ones she had made herself decades ago, back when she had plenty of strength and her fingers didn't tremble when holding a needle. The gentle sunlight streamed through the living room window, illuminating the worn tile floor, the framed portraits on the wall, and the old radio resting on the corner table. That radio was her most faithful companion. Every morning when she woke up, she would turn it on and let the music fill the emptiness that was growing inside the house. Helen was 73 years old and lived alone in that small two-story house in Queens, New York. The place wasn't big, but it was hers. Every room held memories she carried like relics. The kitchen still smelled of the recipes she used to make for her husband, who had passed away almost 10 years ago, leaving a void that nothing could fill. The back porch was home to the pots of ferns and begonias she watered religiously every afternoon, talking softly to the plants as if they could hear her. And maybe they could. Maybe they were the only ones who still listened to what she had to say. Her son, Gabriel, was her only family. But Gabriel was far away. He had always been far away, even when he still lived there. From a young age, he had shown an ambition that Helen didn't know where it came from. He went to public school, fought for scholarships, got his degree in business administration, and slowly began to build an empire. First, it was a job at a multinational corporation. Then, he opened his own financial consulting firm. In less than 15 years, Gabriel had become an influential businessman, a property owner, a stock market investor, respected in the business circles of New York. He had everything he ever wanted. But Helen felt that along the way, he had left something behind. The calls became rarer. The Sunday lunches, once sacred, turned into rushed meetings once a month, then every 2 months, then almost never. Helen understood, or at least she tried to. Gabriel was busy. He had meetings, trips, important commitments. She didn't want to be a burden. So she swallowed her longing and waited. Waited for him to call, to show up by surprise, to remember that she was still there waiting. That Thursday afternoon, while folding a dish towel in the kitchen, the phone rang. Helen jumped. The landline almost never rang. When it did, it was a sales call about health insurance or someone asking for donations. She wiped her hands on her apron and answered with a tired voice. "Hello?" she said. On the other end of the line, a firm, familiar male voice echoed in her ear like a balm she didn't know she needed. "Mum, it's Gabriel." Helen felt her heart leap. She held the phone with both hands, as if afraid it would slip and the call would be lost. "Gabriel, my son, what a wonderful surprise. How are you?" His voice was different, more formal, more distant, but it was still her boy's voice. Gabriel talked about work, about new contracts, about the company's success. Helen listened in silence, smiling even though he couldn't see. But then, after a few minutes of superficial conversation, he said something that left her paralyzed. "Mum, I'm calling because I want you to come live with me." Helen blinked, not quite understanding. "Live with you?" "That's right. It's all decided. I bought a new house, a mansion in the Hamptons. There's plenty of room. You don't have to stay. They're alone anymore. I'll send a driver to pick you up on Saturday. You can pack your things." Helen felt an emotion so intense she could barely respond. Warm tears streamed down her wrinkled face. She had always waited for this. To be remembered, to be called, to have her son's presence back in her life. "Gabriel, I don't know what to say. I miss you so much, my son." "I know, Mom. We'll talk more when you get here. See you Saturday." And before she could say anything else, the call ended. Helen stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding the silent phone, her heart beating fast in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt it had been worth the wait. The next 2 days passed in a blur of emotions. Helen packed her things carefully. She didn't have much to take. She set aside some clothes, the family portraits, the rosary beads her mother had given her, the old radio that had been with her for decades, and her husband's wedding ring, which she wore on a chain around her neck since he passed. She packed everything into 2 old suitcases tied with twine so they wouldn't open on the way. She said goodbye to her plants, to the walls, to the corners of the house she knew by heart. She left the keys with her neighbor, Mrs. Davis, asking her to look after the place while she was away. She didn't talk about selling. She couldn't. That house was her history. On Saturday morning at 9 o'clock sharp, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the house. The driver, a young man in a suit, got out and helped Helen put the suitcases in the trunk. She got into the back seat, feeling strange in that luxurious car with its leather seats and ice-cold air conditioning. Her neighbor waved from the window. Helen waved back, a trembling smile on her lips. The drive to the Hamptons took almost an hour, cutting through the heavy New York traffic. Helen looked out the window, watching the city go by. The tall buildings, the busy avenues, the modern shopping malls. It all seemed so different from the humble neighborhood where she lived. When the car finally stopped, she could hardly believe her eyes. The mansion was immense. A high iron gate opened automatically, revealing a manicured lawn with green grass and pruned trees. The house had 2 stories, huge glass windows, white columns, and a garage that looked like it could hold at least 4 cars. Helen got out slowly, clutching her old purse to her chest. The driver took the suitcases and rang the doorbell. The door was opened almost immediately. But it wasn't Gabriel who was there. It was a young, tall, blonde woman wearing a beige designer pantsuit that looked like it came from a fashion magazine. Her face was beautiful but cold. Her light eyes scanned Helen from head to toe with an expression that left no doubt, contempt. "You must be Gabriel's mother," the woman said without a smile. Helen nodded, trying to smile despite the discomfort she felt. "Yes, that's me." "Helen. And you are?" "Jessica, his fiancée. Come in." The word fiancé dropped like a bomb in Helen's heart. Gabriel hadn't mentioned anything about a wedding. Nothing about a fiancé. She swallowed her surprise and entered the house, following Jessica down a wide hallway with a gleaming white floor. The walls were decorated with modern paintings, minimalist sculptures, and giant mirrors. Everything was clean, cold, impeccable. Nothing there seemed to have any life. "Gabriel is in a meeting," Jessica said, not looking back. "He asked me to welcome you. I'll show you to your room." They crossed the enormous living room, passed through the open-plan kitchen with its state-of-the-art appliances, and went up a narrow side staircase that led to the back of the house. Helen followed in silence, carrying her purse, feeling her heart tighten. The air seemed heavier with every step. Finally, Jessica stopped in front of a small door, opened it, and gestured inside. "Here." Helen walked in and felt her stomach sink. The room was tiny. It barely fit a single bed, a cramped closet, and an old chair. There was no window. The light came from a dim bulb in the ceiling. It smelled of mildew and cleaning products. The paint was peeling in some spots. It looked more like a storage closet than a bedroom. "Is this where I'll be staying?" Helen asked, her voice failing. Jessica crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Look, it wasn't my idea for you to come live here, but Gabriel insisted. The house is big, but we don't have a lot of extra space. This is the only room available. You understand, right? It's temporary, just until we figure things out." Helen didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. Jessica gave a fake smile and left, closing the door behind her. Helen stood in the middle of that stuffy cubicle, clutching her purse to her chest, feeling tears burn in her eyes. She had waited so long for this moment, dreamed so much of reuniting with her son, and now here she was, locked in a dark room at the back of a mansion that didn't seem to have a place for her. But she didn't give up, not on that first day. Helen was a strong woman. She had survived loss, loneliness, hardship. She had raised a son on her own after her husband got sick. She had worked as a cleaner, a seamstress, a cook, all to give her boy a better future. She wasn't going to give up now. Gabriel hadn't come home yet. When he got back, everything would be sorted out. He would hug her, apologize for the cold reception, explain that Jessica was just stressed. Everything would be okay. She took her clothes out of the suitcase and put them in the cramped closet. She hung the rosary beads on the headboard. She placed the old radio on the chair and turned it on softly. The gentle music filled the tiny room, bringing a little comfort. Helen sat on the edge of the bed and closed her eyes, praying quietly, asking for strength. The hours passed slowly. Helen heard sounds coming from the rest of the house, footsteps, voices, laughter. But no one came to talk to her. No one knocked on the door to ask if she was okay, if she needed anything, if she wanted to eat. As the sun began to set outside, she heard Gabriel's voice coming from downstairs. Her heart raced. She stood up quickly, smoothed her white hair, wiped her face, and left the room, hurrying down the narrow staircase. Gabriel was in the living room in a dark suit, talking on the phone. He was tall, strong, handsome, with a neat haircut and the confident posture of someone used to being in charge. Helen stopped at the entrance to the room, waiting for him to finish his call. When Gabriel hung up and saw her, he smiled. A polite, but distant smile. "Mom, did you get here okay?" Helen walked over to him and hugged him. Gabriel returned the hug, but it was quick, mechanical, like someone performing a social duty. "I did, my son. What a beautiful house. I'm so happy to be here with you." "That's good, Mom. Have you met Jessica?" "I have. She showed me to my room." Gabriel nodded, distracted, looking at the phone vibrating in his hand. "Great. You'll like living here. You have everything you need. Now, excuse me, but I have to take care of a few things. I'll see you at dinner." And he left, leaving Helen alone in the huge, empty living room. She stood there, feeling her chest tighten. This wasn't the reunion she had imagined. There were no long hugs, no talks about how much they missed each other, no questions about how she was doing. Gabriel seemed too busy to see her, and Jessica, his fiancée, was a hostile presence that Helen felt even when she wasn't around. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a long table of fine wood with upholstered chairs and expensive china. Jessica presided over the table, sitting at the head, serving herself salad, steak with sauce and red wine. Gabriel was beside her, answering messages on his phone. Helen was called by the housekeeper, a middle-aged black woman named Maria, who led her to the table and pointed to a chair in the corner. Helen sat in silence, observing. No one talked to her. Jessica talked about the engagement party she was organizing, the dresses she was choosing, the flowers, the guests. Gabriel just nodded, not paying much attention. Helen tried to join in. "It's going to be a beautiful wedding," she said, her voice low. Jessica looked at her as if she had forgotten she was there. "It will be," she replied curtly, and went back to talking to Gabriel. Maria brought a plate for Helen, but as she placed the plate in front of the woman, Jessica intervened. "Maria, she's not eating that. Make her something simpler. Rice and beans. That's what she's used to." Helen felt her face flush with shame. Maria looked at her with pity but obeyed, taking the plate back to the kitchen. Gabriel said nothing. He didn't notice, or pretended not to. Helen lowered her eyes, trying to swallow the humiliation. 15 minutes later, Maria returned with a simple plate of rice, beans, and a fried egg. Helen ate in silence, chewing slowly, swallowing with difficulty. The food wouldn't go down. Her throat was too tight. After dinner, Gabriel went up to his office. Jessica disappeared into some other room in the house. Helen returned to her room at the back, feeling more alone than when she lived in Queens. At least there, she had her things, her plants, her space. Here, she was an intruder. She lay down on the narrow bed, listening to the radio play an old song she used to listen to with her husband. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. She thought about the house she had left behind. She thought about the afternoons watering her plants. She thought about the quiet but peaceful Sundays. And she wondered for the first time if she had made the right choice. The following days were a painful repetition of that first night. Helen would wake up early, tidy her tiny room, and go down for breakfast. But she rarely saw Gabriel. He always left before she woke up, Jessica was also rarely home. During the day, Helen spent her hours wandering through the immense rooms, lost in a house that wasn't hers. She tried to help Maria with the cleaning, but the housekeeper always refused, saying she didn't need help. Helen insisted she didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want them to think she was just there for a free ride doing nothing. One of those mornings, she was in the kitchen washing some cups when Jessica came in, accompanied by 2 friends. The 3 of them were laughing loudly, talking about some party from the night before. When Jessica saw Helen at the sink, her face twisted in disgust. "What are you doing there?" Helen turned, startled, holding the wet sponge. "I was just helping Maria." Jessica walked up to her and snatched the sponge from Helen's hand. "You don't need to help with anything. Go to your room." Her friends laughed, exchanging knowing glances. Helen felt her face burn with humiliation, but she obeyed. She went up the narrow staircase back to her stuffy room, locked herself inside, and cried softly, her face buried in her hands. No one knocked on the door to see if she was okay. No one cared. That same afternoon, Helen heard laughter coming from the living room. Curious, she went downstairs and saw Jessica and her friends recording videos on their phones. They were striking poses, dancing, laughing. Helen stood on the stairs, watching. Jessica saw her and gestured for her to come closer. "Come on, mother-in-law, come take a picture with us." Helen came down, hopeful. Maybe Jessica was trying to be nice. Maybe she wanted to include her in the family. She approached timidly, trying to smile. Jessica put an arm around her and took a selfie. The friends laughed. Then, Jessica abruptly let go of Helen and went back to recording, imitating the elderly woman's stooped posture, her trembling voice, her slow movements. Her friends roared with laughter. Helen realized too late that she was being made fun of. She went back up to her room, trembling with anger and sadness. That night, when Gabriel finally came home, Helen tried to talk to him. She waited for him to go up to his room, knocked on the couple's door, and entered when he allowed it. "Gabriel, we need to talk." He was changing his clothes, looking tired. "About what, Mom?" About Jessica. She's not being very kind to me." Gabriel sighed, impatient. "Mom, Jessica is stressed with the wedding preparations. You need to understand. She's not used to having people living here. Give her some time to get used to it." Helen tried to insist, but Gabriel was already distracted by his phone, answering messages. She gave up. She left the room and went back to her dark cubicle, feeling like she was screaming into a void. The weeks passed. Living together became more difficult. Helen noticed that the food served to her was different from everyone else's. Often the leftovers went straight into the trash. Jessica never invited her to lunch or dinner. Helen ate alone in the kitchen after everyone else had finished. Maria always looked at her with pity, but she couldn't do anything. She was an employee too. She also depended on that job. One afternoon, Helen was sitting on the back porch, looking at the impeccable garden she wasn't allowed to touch, when she heard Jessica screaming inside the house. Helen's heart raced. She ran inside and found Jessica tearing through the living room furniture, desperately looking for something. "What happened?" Helen asked. Jessica turned to her, her eyes full of fury. "My earring, my diamond earring is gone. I left it here on the coffee table last night and now it's gone." Helen felt a chill run down her spine. "I didn't take anything." Jessica walked up to her, invading her personal space. "You were the only person who came through here this morning. Maria was cleaning upstairs. It had to be you. I swear I didn't take it. Liar." Before Helen could react, Jessica grabbed her arm tightly, dragged her to the tiny room and started rummaging through her things. She opened the closet, threw clothes on the floor, overturned the old suitcases, scattered everything. Helen tried to stop her, but Jessica shoved her against the wall with such force that she hit her back and let out a groan of pain. "It's not here. So where did you hide it?" "I didn't take anything, Jessica. Please, believe me." Jessica stormed out of the room, leaving the mess behind. Helen slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees, crying softly. Later, she cleaned everything up herself, putting each piece of clothing away with trembling hands. That night, while using the guest bathroom down the hall, she saw something sparkling near the drain. She bent down, picked it up, and recognized it immediately. It was Jessica's diamond earring. It had fallen there, probably when the fiancé had used that bathroom. Helen kept the earring and the next day gave it to Jessica. She expected an apology, a word of acknowledgement, but Jessica just snatched the earring from her hand and said with disdain, "Next time don't take so long to return it." And she walked away, leaving Helen standing there, her heart broken into pieces. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Helen looked at the cracked ceiling and seriously considered leaving. But she had nowhere to go. The house in Queens was closed up. She had no money. And more than anything, she still held on to a foolish hope that Gabriel would realize what was happening, that he would open his eyes and protect her. It was a small, fragile hope, but it was all she had left. So she closed her eyes and prayed once more, asking for the strength to endure another day. The weeks passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Helen woke up every day hoping something would change, that Gabriel would finally realize what was happening, that Jessica would show a shred of humanity. But none of that happened. On the contrary, the situation only got worse. The small room at the back of the mansion had become her prison. She spent hours locked in there, listening to her old radio, praying her rosary, talking softly to the memories of her husband, asking for the strength to endure another day. Her heart ached in a way that not even the loneliness of her house in Queens had ever made it ache. Jessica seemed to take pleasure in humiliating her. It wasn't just the harsh words or the looks of contempt. It was a calculated, small, constant cruelty that slowly chipped away at Helen's dignity. One morning, Helen went down for breakfast and found the table set with fresh bread, assorted cold cuts, fruits and juices. She sat timidly in a corner chair, waiting to be served. Maria brought a plate for her, but before she could put it on the table, Jessica intervened. "Maria, I've told you she eats after we're done and make her something simpler. But Miss Jessica, breakfast is already made. It's no trouble to serve her now." Jessica slammed her hand on the table, annoyed. "I told you to make something different. Do as I say." Maria lowered her eyes and took the plate back to the kitchen. Helen felt her stomach churn with humiliation. Gabriel was there, sitting at the head of the table, reading the news on his tablet. He didn't say a word, didn't look up. He didn't notice, or pretended not to notice, the violence of that scene. Helen sat in silence, waiting. Only when Gabriel and Jessica finished and left the room did Maria return with a plate of dry bread and reheated coffee. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Helen," the housekeeper whispered, her eyes full of pity. "I can't do anything." Helen touched her hand gratefully. "I know, dear. Don't worry." But inside, she felt a pain that went beyond hunger. It was the pain of not being seen, of not mattering, of being treated like a nuisance in a house that should have been hers too. The days grew crueler. One afternoon, Helen was sitting in the living room, flipping through an old magazine she had found in her room, when Jessica entered with 3 friends. They were laughing loudly, talking about a party they had been to the night before. When they saw Helen, the laughter grew louder. Jessica took out her phone and started recording. "Look who's here," Jessica said, pointing the camera at Helen. "My dear mother-in-law, say hi to my friend's mother-in-law." Helen looked at the camera, not quite understanding what was happening. She tried to smile politely. "Hi." The friends laughed. Jessica kept recording. "Tell them, mother-in-law, what was your life like before you came to live in this wonderful house?" Helen felt her discomfort grow, but she tried to answer with dignity. "I lived in Queens in a simple house, but it was my house." Jessica made an exaggerated face for the camera. "Simple? You mean poor, right? A little poor person's house. It must have been awful, but now you're here, living in luxury. You must be happy, right?" The friends laughed harder. Helen felt her face flush. She didn't answer. Jessica continued recording for a few more seconds, making jokes about Helen's old clothes, about the way she walked hunched over, about her accent. When she finally stopped recording, she turned her back and left with her friends, leaving Helen sitting alone, trembling with anger and humiliation. That night, when Maria passed by Helen's room to collect the dirty towels, the elderly woman asked in a low voice, "Maria, do you know what Jessica does with those videos she records?" The housekeeper hesitated. Then she sighed and said, "She posts them on social media, Mrs. Helen, on her stories. Her friends think it's funny." Helen felt her chest tighten. People were seeing that. They were laughing at her. They found the humiliation of an elderly woman who just wanted a place to belong amusing. She said nothing more. Maria left and Helen was alone in the dark, crying in silence. Maria, in fact, was beginning to be deeply disturbed by what she saw. She had worked in that house for 3 years, since before Jessica appeared. She had seen Gabriel grow in his business, seen him change, become more distant, colder. And now she was watching his mother be destroyed, little by little. Maria was a woman of faith, a mother of 2, who worked hard to support her family. She knew what it was to suffer. She knew what it was to be invisible. And it hurt to see another woman going through the same thing. One afternoon, while cleaning Jessica's room, Maria found a bag full of spoiled food. Moldy fruit, leftover meat, moldy bread. She recognized it immediately. It was the food that had been prepared for Helen over the past few days. Maria knew that Jessica would take the plates meant for her mother-in-law and throw them straight in the trash, replacing them with old, reheated, spoiled food. It was deliberate cruelty, and Gabriel knew nothing, or didn't want to know. Maria began to save small details. She noted the dates she saw Helen with bruises on her arm on her phone. She took discreet photos of the conditions in the tiny room where the elderly woman slept. She saved evidence. She didn't know what she would do with it yet, but she felt she had to do something. One morning, Helen woke up with a sharp pain in her back. She had slept poorly. The bed was hard, the mattress sagging. She got up slowly, holding her lower back, and went to the bathroom down the hall. When she returned to her room, she found Jessica standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "I need you to stay in your room today," Jessica said in a cold voice. "Why?" Helen asked. "I'm having guests, important people. I don't want you showing up." Helen felt her chest tighten. "Does Gabriel know about this?" "Gabriel isn't here. And when he gets back, I'll tell him you weren't feeling well and preferred to rest, so you'd better stay quiet in there." Jessica slammed the door shut and turned the key in the lock. Helen stood there, listening to the footsteps fade away. She tried the door, but it was locked. She was locked, entrapped, in a room with no window, no ventilation, in the middle of a hot summer day in New York. Panic rose in her throat. She banged on the door, called for help, but no one answered. She was there for hours, sweating, thirsty, feeling the air get stuffier and stuffier. Only when it was night and the guests had left did Jessica come back and unlock the door. Helen stumbled out, dizzy, desperate for fresh air. Maria saw her and ran to help, taking her to the kitchen, giving her water, fanning her with a cloth. Jessica watched, with indifference, and went up to her room without a word. That night, Helen seriously considered running away. But where to? She had no money, she had no way to get back to Queens, and more than anything, she still held on to a spark of hope that Gabriel would notice, that he would save her. It was an irrational, childish hope, but it was all she had. The following weeks brought new horrors. Helen began to realize that Jessica was escalating the violence. It was no longer just verbal humiliation or neglect. Now there were shoves, hair-pulling, pinches, that left purple bruises on her arms. One afternoon, Helen was folding towels in the laundry room when Jessica came in, angry for some reason Helen didn't know. "What are you doing in here?" "I was just helping." "I didn't ask for your help." And before Helen could answer, Jessica pushed the pile of folded towels, sending them all to the floor. Then she grabbed Helen by the arm and pulled her so hard that the elderly woman lost her balance and fell to her knees on the cold floor. "Stay in your place, you useless old woman." Helen stayed, on the floor, trembling, holding her aching arm. Maria ran in, helped the elderly woman up, and took her back to her room. Inside, Helen cried her eyes out, hugging her pillow, feeling trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Maria went back to the laundry room and confronted Jessica, who was arranging the towels as if nothing had happened. "This isn't right, Miss Jessica. Mrs. Helen is an elderly woman. You can't treat her like this." Jessica turned slowly, a cold smile on her lips. "Are you telling me how to treat people in my own home?" Maria swallowed hard but held her ground. "I'm saying that what you're doing is wrong." Jessica walked up to her, invading her personal space. "You know what, Maria? I think you're working too hard. You're getting things confused. Maybe it's time you found another job." Maria's heart sank. She needed that job. She needed the salary to support her children. But looking into Jessica's cold eyes, she realized it was no use trying anymore. So she took a deep breath and said, "Fine, I'll leave. But first I want my severance pay, and I want Mr. Gabriel to know why I'm leaving." Jessica shrugged. "Say whatever you want. No one will believe you." Maria packed her things that same afternoon. But before she left, she did something she knew could cost her dearly. She took all the photos she had discreetly taken over the past few months. The bruises on Helen's arm, the tiny, stuffy room, the remains of spoiled food, the notes about the dates she witnessed abuse. She saved everything in a digital folder and emailed it to herself. She didn't know what she would do with it yet, but she felt it was important to have this proof. Someday it might make a difference. When Maria left the mansion, Helen felt she had lost her only ally, the only person who still looked at her with humanity. Now she was completely alone. Gabriel, for his part, remained oblivious to everything. He worked late, traveled for meetings, came home tired and distracted. Jessica always greeted him with kisses and smiles, talking about the wedding preparations, the engagement party, the honeymoon she was planning. Gabriel listened with interest, excited about the new life he was building. He didn't see his mother. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't notice the bruises. He didn't notice the silence. He was blind, willfully blind. One night during dinner, Helen gathered her courage and tried one more time. "Gabriel, I need to talk to you." He looked at her, impatient. "About what, Mom?" About how things are here at home. I'm not feeling well. I think maybe it's better if I go back to my house." Gabriel frowned. "Go back? Why? You don't like living here?" "It's not that, it's just—" Jessica intervened, her voice sweet and controlled. "Honey, I think your mother is a little confused. It's normal for older people. They get disoriented in new places." Helen tried to protest, but Gabriel was already convinced. "Mom, you need to get used to it. Give it some more time. You'll see it's worth it." And the subject was closed. Helen lowered her eyes, defeated. It was no use trying anymore. Preparations for the wedding ceremony began to dominate the house. Jessica hired decorators, florists, chefs. The ceremony would be held right there, in the mansion's garden, followed by a reception in the outdoor area. There would be about 100 guests, all from Jessica and Gabriel's social circle. Important, influential, wealthy people. Jessica was obsessed with everything being perfect. Every detail had to be impeccable. She couldn't tolerate any mistakes. And more than anything, she couldn't tolerate Helen's presence ruining the image of perfection she wanted to project. In the week before the wedding, the tension in the house escalated. Jessica was hysterical, yelling at vendors, changing her mind every 5 minutes, demanding that everything be redone several times. Helen tried to stay invisible, locked in her room, but even so she felt the growing pressure. One afternoon, 2 days before the ceremony, Helen was sitting in the living room when Gabriel came home early. He looked tired but happy. He sat next to her on the sofa and for the first time in weeks really talked to her. "Mom, I want you to know that I'm happy. Very happy. Jessica is an incredible woman. Smart, beautiful, ambitious. She's going to be a great wife." Helen looked at her son, seeing the boy she had raised, but feeling like she no longer recognized him. "Gabriel, I just want you to be happy, my son. But are you sure she's the right person for you?" Gabriel frowned. "Why are you asking that?" Helen hesitated. Part of her wanted to scream the truth, to tell him everything she had been through, to show him the bruises, to describe the humiliations. But another part of her, the tired, defeated part, thought it would be useless. Gabriel wouldn't believe her, or worse, he would believe her and blame her for ruining his happiness. "Nothing, my son. Forget it. I just want you to be happy." Gabriel smiled and hugged her. A quick, mechanical hug, but it still made Helen's heart ache. It was so little, but it was all she had. On the eve of the wedding, the house was in chaos. Florists came and went, carrying giant arrangements. Uniformed waiters practiced their service choreography. The kitchen was full of chefs preparing the dishes. Jessica ran from one place to another, shouting orders, checking every detail. Gabriel had traveled to handle one last business commitment and would only be back on the morning of the wedding. Helen was locked in her room, listening to the commotion outside, when she heard a knock on the door. It was one of Jessica's assistants. "Ms. Jessica has asked that you stay in your room during the entire party. Tomorrow. She doesn't want you to be seen." Helen felt her chest tighten. "But it's my son's wedding." The young woman shrugged, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. Those are her orders." And she left. Helen stood there, feeling hot tears stream down her face. She wouldn't be able to attend her own son's wedding. She would be locked in a room, hidden away, as if she were a source of shame. As if she didn't exist. That night, Helen couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the radio play softly, praying her rosary, asking God to give her the strength to endure one more day. The tears wouldn't stop falling. She thought about giving up, about running away, about disappearing, but she had nowhere to go. She was trapped in this nightmare, with no way out. When the sun rose the next day, the house was already bustling with activity. Helen heard footsteps, voices, music being tested. Her heart ached in a way she had never felt before. She got up slowly, washed her face, and put on the least worn-out dress she owned. Even knowing she would be barred from participating, she couldn't accept it. It was her son's wedding. She had a right to be there. She went down the stairs slowly, hiding behind columns, watching the activity. The garden was unrecognizable. Flowers everywhere, white chairs lined up, a decorated arch for the ceremony, tables covered with white linen tablecloths. Everything was perfect, impeccable, cold. Helen saw Jessica coming out of her room, already dressed in an elegant white wedding gown. She was stunning, radiant, and completely oblivious to the suffering she caused. Helen hid behind a pillar, watching. Jessica chatted with her bridesmaids, laughed, took pictures. Everything was perfect, except for Helen. She was the only imperfection in that dreamlike scene, and for that she had to be hidden. Helen went back to her room, defeated. She locked herself inside and sat on the edge of the bed, holding her rosary with trembling hands. She cried softly, prayed for strength, and waited for the nightmare to end. The day of the wedding dawned clear and warm in New York. The sky was a cloudless blue, as if the weather itself was conspiring for everything to be perfect. The mansion in the Hamptons had been buzzing with activity since the early hours of the morning. Uniformed waiters carried silver trays, arranged crystal glasses on the tables, and aligned silverware with millimeter precision. Florists put the final touches on the giant arrangements of white roses and lilies that decorated every corner of the garden. Soft ambient music played through strategically placed speakers. Everything was impeccable, absolutely everything. Except for one detail Jessica couldn't control: Helen's unwanted presence. Helen woke up early that Saturday. Not that she had slept much. She had spent the entire night lying on the narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the radio play softly, trying to find some comfort in the old songs she loved so much. But no song could calm her aching heart. No melody could ease the pain of knowing she would be barred from her own son's wedding. When the first rays of sun slipped under the door, she got up slowly, washed her face in the tiny sink, and put on the nicest dress she had. It was a simple navy blue dress, but it was clean and well pressed. She combed her white hair back into a low bun and put on the chain with her husband's wedding ring. She looked at herself in the small, foggy mirror on the wall and saw a tired, broken woman, but one who still had her dignity. She wasn't going to give up. She wouldn't let Jessica completely erase her. She went down the narrow back stairs with her heart pounding. She knew she was defying Jessica's orders by leaving the room, but she could no longer accept being invisible. It was Gabriel's wedding. She had every right to be there. When she reached the main hallway, she saw the intense activity of the decorating and catering staff. No one paid her any attention. It was as if she were a ghost. Helen walked slowly to the kitchen, where she saw stacks of plates, trays full of canapes, and glasses being polished. Everything smelled of luxury and sophistication. She timidly approached one of the waitresses. "Can I help with anything?" she asked in a low voice. The young woman looked at her, confused. "Help? Do you work here?" Before Helen could answer, a shrill voice cut through the air. "What are you doing here?" Helen turned to see Jessica standing at the kitchen entrance, still in a silk robe, her hair in rollers, her face bare of makeup but her eyes blazing with fury. She strode toward Helen with quick, firm steps. "I told you to stay in your room." Helen instinctively backed away. "I just wanted to help. It's my son's wedding, Jessica. I want to be a part of it." Jessica laughed, a short, bitter laugh full of contempt. "A part of it? Do you really think anyone here wants you around? Look at you. Look at how you're dressed. You're an embarrassment. You're going to ruin everything." The words hit Helen like punches. She felt her eyes sting, but she tried to maintain her composure. "I am his mother. I have the right to be here. You have no rights. This is my house, and today is my day. I'm not going to let you ruin it with your pathetic presence." Jessica grabbed Helen's arm, digging her nails into the soft, wrinkled skin. Helen let out a whimper of pain, but Jessica didn't let go. She dragged her out of the kitchen, across the hall under the embarrassed gazes of the staff, who pretended not to see, and shoved her back into the small room at the back of the house. "Stay in here and don't come. Out until I say so. If you come out, I swear I'll make you regret it." And she slammed the door with such force that the wall shook. Helen stood in the middle of the tiny room, trembling, holding her aching arm. She looked at her skin and saw the purple marks from Jessica's nails. She sat on the edge of the bed and cried softly, burying her face in her hands. She felt defeated, humiliated, erased. But deep down, she still held on to a spark of hope. Gabriel would be here soon. When Gabriel arrived, everything would be okay. He would see. He would protect her. The hours passed slowly. Helen heard the sounds of the house through the closed door. Voices, laughter, music. The party was getting started. The guests were beginning to arrive. She recognized Gabriel's voice from downstairs, and her heart leaped. He was back from his trip. He was home. She stood up quickly, straightened her dress, and left the room, determined to talk to him. She went down the stairs and saw Gabriel in the living room, in an impeccable grey suit, surrounded by friends congratulating him and patting him on the back. He was smiling, happy, excited. Helen approached slowly, but before she could call his name, Jessica appeared out of nowhere, already in her stunning white wedding dress, and placed a hand on her shoulder with force. "I warned you." And before Helen could react, Jessica pulled her back into the hallway, away from the guests' eyes. She took her to the service area, where no one else was. There, away from witnesses, Jessica's fury exploded. "You just don't get it, do you? You don't understand that nobody wants you here. Gabriel doesn't. I don't. You're a dead weight in this house. A walking embarrassment." Helen tried to pull away, but Jessica was out of control. The stress of the preparations, the fear that something would go wrong, the obsession with appearing perfect in front of her important guests, it all erupted in that moment. She grabbed Helen by her white hair and started dragging her down the hall. Helen screamed in pain, trying to hold onto the walls, but Jessica was stronger, younger, driven by an irrational rage. She dragged the elderly woman for several feet, pulling her hair so hard that Helen felt she might faint. Tears streamed down her face. Her knees scraped against the floor. Her hands scratched at the tiles, trying to find a grip. "Stop, please, stop," Helen begged, her voice choked with sobs. "Stop! You're hurting me." But Jessica didn't stop. She kept dragging her until they reached a narrow closet at the end of the back hallway. There, far from the party, far from the guests, far from any witnesses, Helen tried to get up, but she was dizzy, disoriented, her head throbbing with pain. Jessica shoved her hard against the wall. Helen slipped, lost her balance, and fell backward, slamming her head hard on the corner of a piece of furniture before collapsing to the floor. The impact was terrible. Helen felt an explosion of pain at the back of her head. Something warm and sticky ran down her neck. She brought a trembling hand to it, and when she looked at her fingers, she saw blood. A lot of blood. She tried to get up, but her body wouldn't obey. Her vision blurred. Her legs had no strength. She lay on the floor, bleeding, breathing with difficulty. Jessica looked at her, at the blood on the floor, at the red-stained wall. For a moment, panic flashed across her face, but then something even more terrifying happened. She composed herself. She looked around, checked if anyone was nearby, and made a decision. She grabbed Helen by the arms and dragged her into the closet. It was a tight, dark space used to store cleaning supplies and old boxes. She threw the elderly woman inside without any care, closed the door, and turned the key in the lock. Helen tried to scream, but her voice wouldn't come out. She tried to bang on the door, but her arms were too weak. The darkness enveloped her. The smell of mildew and chemicals filled her lungs. The pain in her head was unbearable. She leaned against the cold closet wall and began to lose consciousness. Outside, Jessica quickly wiped the bloodstains from the hallway with paper towels, threw them in the trash, and returned to the party as if nothing had happened. She adjusted her dress, touched up her makeup, put her smile back on, and went down to the garden where the ceremony was about to begin. The guests applauded when she appeared. Gabriel was waiting for her under the arch of flowers with a wide, adoring smile. The music began to play. Jessica walked down the aisle of flowers with elegance, waving to friends, posing for photographers, playing the part of the perfect bride. When she reached the makeshift altar, Gabriel took her hands and looked into her eyes with adoration. The justice of the peace began the ceremony. Meanwhile, locked in the dark closet at the back of the house, Helen was in agony. The pain in her head was unbearable. The blood continued to flow, soaking her navy blue dress. She tried to stay conscious, but it was getting harder and harder. She scratched at the door with her nails, trying to make a noise, trying to call for someone, but the loud music from the party drowned out any sound. She whispered pleas for help that were lost in the void. "Gabriel," she murmured, her voice weak. "Gabriel, my son, help me." But Gabriel couldn't hear her. He was exchanging rings with Jessica, kissing her under the applause of the guests, toasting with champagne, posing for photos. The party was in full swing. Waiters served sophisticated canapés. Guests chatted animatedly. The music played and laughter echoed through the garden. Everything was joy, celebration, perfection, and there, hidden, locked away, bleeding, an elderly woman was fighting for her life. The hours passed. Helen drifted in and out of consciousness. At times she saw flashes of memories, her husband smiling at her on their wedding day, Gabriel as a child, running through the yard of their house in Queens, the afternoons watering her plants, the radio playing old songs. At other times, there was only darkness and pain. Gabriel, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to his mother's suffering. He chatted animatedly with friends, danced with Jessica, toasted with the guests. At one point, he went to the guest bathroom and, as he crossed the hallway, he stepped on something wet. He looked down and saw a dark stain on the floor. He frowned. It looked like blood, but it couldn't be. It was probably spilled wine or sauce from one of the dishes. He kept walking, but something bothered him, a strange smell, metallic, strong. When he returned to the party, he looked for Jessica and asked, "Where's my mother?" Jessica smiled, controlled. She wasn't feeling well. She asked to rest in her room. She didn't want to be a bother. Gabriel nodded, satisfied. With the answer, he went back to the party. But as the night wore on, that unease grew. Something was wrong. Something he couldn't put his finger on. It was a feeling, an instinct, a small voice in the back of his mind telling him that something was very wrong. When the party finally started to wind down and the guests left, Gabriel went upstairs to change. He passed through the back hallway and saw those dark stains on the floor again. Now, without the chaos of the party, he stopped and bent down to examine them. He touched it with his finger. It was dry, but it was definitely blood. And there was more. A single grey hair caught in a crack of the closet door. His heart began to beat faster. He tried to open the closet door, but it was locked. He looked for the key, but couldn't find it. He felt panic rising. "Jessica!" he yelled. "Jessica! Where's the key to this closet?" Jessica ran up the stairs, still in her wedding dress, her face pale. "Why do you want to open that?" Because there's blood on the floor, and I want to know where came from. Jessica tried to make up an excuse, but Gabriel wasn't listening anymore. He slammed his shoulder against the door once, twice, 3 times, until the lock gave way. The door flew open, and what he saw paralyzed him. Helen was lying on the closet floor, curled in a fetal position, covered in blood. Her blue dress was soaked in red. Her white hair was matted to her neck with dried blood. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow, her hands scratched from trying to get out. When the light from the hallway flooded the closet, she slowly raised her eyes and saw her son. "Gabriel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Gabriel, help me." Gabriel's world collapsed in that moment. He fell to his knees beside his mother, holding her face in his trembling hands, feeling the warm, sticky blood. "Mom, my God, what happened? What did they do to you?" Helen tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. She just cried, trembling, clinging to her son's arm as if he were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. Gabriel turned to Jessica, who was standing in the doorway, pale in shock. "You," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "It was you." Jessica tried to deny it, but the guilt was written all over her face. "Gabriel, I can explain," she started to say, but he cut her off, screaming. "You locked my mother in here. You did this to her." "It was an accident. She fell. I didn't know it was so bad. You locked her in here and left her bleeding while we were partying downstairs." His voice echoed down the hall. Gabriel carefully lifted his mother into his arms, stood up, and carried her down the stairs. Helen was weak, almost unconscious, but she clung to her son's neck. He crossed the living room where a few lingering guests were still chatting. They all turned and stared in shock at the scene, Gabriel carrying his blood-soaked mother in his arms. "Call an ambulance, now," he ordered. One of his friends immediately grabbed his phone. Gabriel gently laid Helen on the living room sofa, got clean towels, and pressed them against the wound on her head, trying to stop the bleeding. "Hang on, Mom. The ambulance is coming, just hang on." Jessica came down the stairs, still trying to justify herself, but Gabriel cut her off with an icy voice. "Get out of my sight. I don't want to hear your voice. I don't want to see your face." "Gabriel, please let me explain." "There's no explanation. You hurt my mother. You locked her up. You left her there, bleeding, while we celebrated. You're a monster." The guests who were still in the house witnessed everything. The scandal was out. Jessica tried to approach Gabriel, but he recoiled in disgust. "Get your things and get out of my house, now." "But Gabriel, we just got married. There's no more wedding, it's over, do you hear me? It's over. I never want to see you again for the rest of my life." The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later. The paramedics examined Helen, stabilized her, and placed her on a stretcher. Gabriel got into the ambulance with her, holding her hand the entire time. Jessica stood at the mansion's door, still in her wedding dress, watching the ambulance drive away as the last guests stared at her with horror and contempt. The perfect bride had been revealed as a nightmare. The hospital was quiet when Gabriel entered the waiting room for the 10th time that early morning. His eyes were swollen from crying. The grey suit he had worn for the wedding was wrinkled and stained with blood, and his hands still trembled. He couldn't stop seeing the image of his mother lying in that dark closet, bleeding, begging for help. The guilt was suffocating him. How had he not noticed? How had he let this happen right under his nose? How had he been so blind, so selfish, so absent? The doctors hadn't given a full diagnosis yet. Helen had been in surgery for over 3 hours. Nurses came and went, but they offered no information. Gabriel paced back and forth, unable to sit, unable to relax, unable to think about anything but his mother. He had called the mansion dozens of times, but Jessica didn't answer. She had probably already packed her bags and left, and he didn't care. She was out of his life forever. As the sun began to rise, a doctor finally came out of the operating room. Gabriel rushed to him. "Doctor, how is she?" The doctor removed his mask, revealing a tired face. "The situation is serious, Mr. Gabriel. Your mother suffered severe head trauma. She had a skull fracture and some internal bleeding that we managed to stop. Additionally, we found 3 fractured ribs, multiple contusions all over her body, and signs of malnutrition. The evidence indicates she's been suffering abuse for some time. Gabriel felt his legs give way. He leaned against the wall to keep from falling. Is she going to survive? She's stable for now, but she'll need constant monitoring, and it will take a long time for her to fully recover. Besides the physical injuries, there's the emotional trauma. Your mother has been through a lot. Gabriel nodded, swallowing a sob. Can I see her? She's in the ICU, still unconscious, but you can see her briefly. Gabriel followed the doctor to the intensive care unit. When he saw his mother lying in the hospital bed, connected to tubes and monitors, his heart shattered. Helen looked so small, so fragile, so vulnerable. Her white hair was shaved on one side of her head where they had operated. Her skin was pale, marked with purple and yellow bruises. Her hands were bandaged. Gabriel approached slowly, gently took her hand and sat beside the bed. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I'm your son and I failed you. I failed you completely." Tears streamed down his face. He kissed his mother's hand, feeling the cold, wrinkled skin. He stayed there for hours, just holding her hand, praying for her to wake up, for a chance to truly ask for forgiveness. Helen spent 3 days in the ICU. Gabriel never left the hospital. He slept in uncomfortable chairs, ate cold sandwiches from the cafeteria and refused all work calls. Nothing else mattered, only his mother. When she finally woke up on the 3rd day, her eyes opened slowly, confused, disoriented. Gabriel was by her bedside, as always. "Mom," he called softly. "Mom, it's me, Gabriel." Helen turned her head slowly and saw him. For a moment she was afraid. Then she recognized her son and a tear rolled down her cheek. "Gabriel," she whispered. "I'm here, Mom. I'm here. And I'm never leaving your side again." She tried to smile, but the pain was too great. Gabriel called the doctors who examined Helen and confirmed she was out of danger. The recovery would be long, but she was going to survive. Gabriel felt such immense relief that he broke down in tears again. In the following days, Helen was moved to a regular room. Gabriel stayed by her side, helping the nurses, talking to her, telling stories from his childhood, repeatedly asking for forgiveness. Helen listened in silence, still weak, still traumatized, but slowly she began to talk too. She told him in a faint voice everything she had been through, the humiliations, the assaults, the hunger, the isolation. Gabriel listened with a broken heart, the guilt growing with every word. When Helen was finally discharged, after 2 weeks in the hospital, Gabriel took her back to the mansion. But as soon as they walked in, Helen asked to leave. "Gabriel, I don't want to stay here. Please, take me to my house." He looked at her, confused. "But Mom, the house in Queens has been closed up for months. No one's been taking care of it." "Even so, I want to go back. I can't breathe here. Every corner of this house reminds me of what I went through. Please, my son, let me go back to where I belong." Gabriel hesitated. Part of him wanted to keep her close, to take care of her, to make up for all the lost time. But seeing his mother's tired, pleading eyes, he understood. She needed peace. She needed a place where she felt safe, where she felt at home. "Okay, Mom. I'll take you back to Queens, but first let me get everything ready there. The house must need some repairs. Give me a few days to get it organized." Helen agreed, relieved. Gabriel temporarily set her up in one of the mansion's guest rooms, far from that dark cubicle at the back, and got to work. In the following days, Gabriel did something he had never done before. He stopped working. He cancelled meetings, postponed commitments, delegated responsibilities. For the first time in years, his mother was his priority. He hired a renovation crew and went to Queens personally to supervise everything. When he entered the old house, a wave of emotions washed over him. Everything was exactly as he remembered from his childhood. The small living room with the worn-out sofa, the simple kitchen with the faded tiles, the back porch where his mother tended her plants. It was a humble place, but it was full of life, full of memories. Gabriel walked slowly through the rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, reliving memories he had buried for years. He hired painters, electricians, plumbers. He had the cracked floor replaced, the leaks fixed, the bathroom remodeled. He bought a new, comfortable bed for his mother's room, installed an air conditioner, and replaced the old curtains with new, light ones. But he made sure to keep the essence of the house. The old radio stayed in the same place. The family portraits remained on the walls. The potted plants were lovingly repotted. Everything was done, with her comfort and happiness in mind. One afternoon, while the plumbers were working in the bathroom, one of them called Gabriel over. "Sir, we found something here in the drain." Gabriel went closer. The plumber handed him a small, dirty object. Gabriel wiped it with a cloth and felt his heart ache. It was a wedding ring, his father's wedding ring, the same one his mother always wore on a chain around her neck. Gabriel vaguely remembered seeing that the ring was missing a few months ago but had never asked. Now he understood. It had fallen in the mansion's bathroom, probably during one of the assaults, and no one had bothered to look for it. No one had cared about anything that was hers. Gabriel clutched the ring tightly, feeling the tears well up again. That ring represented everything. It represented the love his mother held for his father, even after so many years. It represented the devotion she had always shown her family, and it represented the contempt with which he had treated her, letting something so precious be lost without even noticing. That night, Gabriel had a dream. He was a child again, running through the yard of the house in Queens. His mother was there, young, smiling, calling him for lunch. His father was beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Everything was simple, but everything was happy. Gabriel woke up in the middle of the night, his face wet with tears. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the longing, the regret, the pain, and also hope. Hope that there was still time to fix things, time to rebuild. 2 weeks later, the renovation was complete. Gabriel took Helen back to Queens on a sunny Saturday afternoon. When she got out of the car and saw the house, her eyes filled with tears. Everything was renovated, but it was still her house. Gabriel helped her inside, holding her arm carefully. Helen walked slowly through the rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, finally feeling at home. "Thank you, my son," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for bringing me back." Gabriel hugged her gently, careful not to hurt her. "I'm the one who should be thanking you, Mom, for everything, for raising me on your own, for putting up with so much, for never giving up on me, even when I had given up on you." Helen cried in her son's arms, and Gabriel cried too. It was a cry of release, of forgiveness, of a new beginning. In the following weeks, Gabriel started doing something he had never done before. He visited his mother every weekend, without fail. He would arrive on Saturday morning, bringing fresh bread, fruit and flowers for the vases. He would have lunch with her, talk for hours, listen to the old stories she told, and revisit childhood memories. Slowly, their relationship began to rebuild. It wasn't perfect. There were still wounds, but it was getting better. Gabriel also made drastic changes in his life. He sold the mansion in the Hamptons. He said he couldn't live there anymore after everything that had happened. He bought a smaller, simpler apartment, closer to Queens. He cut ties with several friends who were only close to him for his money. He simplified his life. He realized that professional success meant nothing if he lost what truly mattered. As for Jessica, she tried to contact him several times in the first few weeks. She sent messages apologizing, saying she was sorry, that she was willing to change. Gabriel blocked her number. There was no forgiveness, there was no going back. What she had done was unforgivable, and Gabriel knew that the blame was also his, for being blind, for not protecting his mother, for choosing appearances over substance. Maria, the former housekeeper, contacted Gabriel a few weeks later. She sent the photos and notes she had saved, offering them as evidence if he wanted to sue Jessica. Gabriel thanked her, but said he didn't want to pursue the matter. He didn't want courts, lawyers, scandals. He just wanted peace. He wanted to rebuild his relationship with his mother. He wanted to be the son he should have been from the start. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, Gabriel was sitting on the back porch of the Queen's house, helping Helen water the ferns, when she said something that took him by surprise. "Gabriel, I want you to know that I forgive you." He stopped, looking at her. "Mum, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. You were my son. You still are. And you always will be. I know you made a mistake. I know you hurt me. But I also know you were lost. You were searching for something you thought would make you happy. And now you've woken up, you've come back, and that's all I ever wanted." Gabriel felt tears stream down his face. He knelt in front of his mother and held her hands. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it. I promise I'll never leave you alone again. I promise I'll take care of you the way you always took care of me." Helen caressed her son's face tenderly. "I know, my son. I know." They stayed there, embracing on the porch, listening to the rain fall outside, feeling the peace that only comes when wounds begin to heal. The old radio played a soft song in the living room. The plants gave off a fresh scent. The house was alive again. And Helen finally felt like she belonged somewhere. Over time, Gabriel began to bring positive changes into his own life. He started dedicating fewer hours to work and more to the things that truly mattered. He started going to therapy to deal with his guilt and regret. He began volunteering at a nursing home, helping others who were going through situations similar to what his mother had endured. He discovered that true success wasn't in the size of his bank account or his social prestige, but in the ability to make a difference in the lives of the people we love. Helen, for her part, recovered slowly. The physical wounds healed. The pain in her ribs subsided. Her hair grew back, hiding the scars from the surgery. But the emotional wounds took longer. She still had nightmares. She still woke up in the middle of the night, afraid, thinking she was back in that tiny room in that dark closet. But slowly, with her son's love, with the peace of her home, with the comforting routine of small things, she began to heal. Sundays became sacred. Gabriel would arrive early, bring fresh ingredients, and together they would prepare lunch. Helen taught him old recipes her husband had loved. Gabriel listened attentively, took notes, asked for details. After lunch, they would sit in the living room and talk. Sometimes, Gabriel would talk about work, about challenges, about the decisions he had to make. Helen would listen and offer wise advice, the fruit of a lifetime of experience. Other times they would just sit in silence listening to the radio, each lost in their own thoughts but united by each other's presence. On one of those afternoons, Gabriel brought a small box wrapped in gift paper. He handed it to Helen with a shy smile. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "Open it and see." Helen opened it carefully and found a new silver chain, delicate and beautiful, and hanging from it was her husband's wedding ring, cleaned and polished, shining like new. "I found it during the renovation of the bathroom here," Gabriel explained. "I had it cleaned and bought a new chain. Now you can wear it again." Helen held the ring with trembling hands, feeling tears stream down her face. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol that what is precious is never completely lost. It can always be found, cleaned, restored. "Thank you, my son, thank you for everything." Gabriel helped her put the chain around her neck. The ring rested on her chest, near her heart, where it always should have been. As the months passed, the house in Queens became what it had always been, a home. Helen went back to tending her plants with care. She went back to listening to the radio every morning. She started receiving visits from Mrs. Davis, the neighbor, who was thrilled to see her back. The simple, humble routine that had been so brutally interrupted was resumed. But now there was something more. There was Gabriel, present, attentive, caring. He started bringing small gifts every time he visited. A new plant for the porch, a book of old recipes, a framed photo of him as a child, small gestures that showed he cared, that he saw his mother, that she mattered. On one particularly beautiful afternoon, Gabriel arrived with a different surprise. He brought a dog, a caramel-colored mutt, still a puppy, that had been rescued from a shelter. He placed the puppy in Helen's lap. She was surprised at first, But then she smiled, petting the animal tenderly. "So you won't be alone during the week," Gabriel explained. "He'll keep you company." Helen accepted the gift with gratitude. The dog, whom she named Popcorn, quickly became part of the family. He followed her around the house, slept at the foot of her bed, and barked when anyone approached. He was protection, companionship, and unconditional love. Gabriel, seeing his mother happier, healthier, more at peace, finally felt he was on the right path. The guilt was still there, but it had lessened. The regret still hurt, but now he channeled that pain into doing better, into being better. One December evening, almost a year after everything had happened, Gabriel was sitting on the porch with his mother, drinking coffee and eating the cornbread she had made. The stars shone in the dark sky. The sound of crickets filled the silence. Gabriel looked at his mother and said, his voice serene, "Mom, I've learned a lot this year. I learned that money can't buy happiness. I learned that success without family means nothing. I learned that the most important thing in life is to take care of the people we love. And I learned that I almost lost the most important person in my life because I was blind, selfish, and an idiot." Helen smiled, touching his hand. "You're none of those things, my son. You were lost. But now you've found your way back. And that's what matters." Gabriel squeezed her hand. "I promise I'll continue to be present. I'll continue to take care of you. I'll continue to be the son you deserve." Helen looked up at the starry sky and sighed, at peace. "I know, Gabriel. I always knew that deep down, you were still my boy. And you always will be." They sat there in silence, feeling the cool night breeze, listening to the radio playing inside the house, with Popcorn lying at their feet. It was a simple moment, but it was everything. It was what truly mattered. It was what they had lost and finally found again, in the same place, in the eye, where it all began years ago when Gabriel was just a child running through the yard and Helen was a young mother full of dreams. They were now rebuilding a new story. A story of forgiveness, of healing, of a love that withstands time and storms. A story that proved it's never too late to come home. It's never too late to embrace who truly matters. It's never too late to choose love over ambition, presence over absence, heart over appearance. And so, mother and son continued on together, healing wounds, building memories, protecting what was truly valuable. The real wealth wasn't in mansions, luxury cars, or extravagant parties. The real wealth was right there, in that simple house in Queens, in the Sunday conversations, in the sincere hugs, in the shared laughter, in the certainty that, no matter what happened, they would always have each other. And that, they discovered, was more than enough. It was everything. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helen and Gabriel has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of pain, forgiveness, and rebuilding, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, make us reflect on the value of relationships, and on what truly matters in life. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, with more stories that will make you feel, think, and connect. See you soon.